With Dungeon Architect, your landscapes automatically adjust to fit your generated layouts. Terrain carving, edge blending, material painting, all of it is done by Dungeon Architect in a non-destructive way. In this video, we'll look at how this is done. Update to the latest version of Dungeon Architect and open up the Launchpad, and you would find a new sample called the Landscape Transformer. Now you can click the view folder and it will take you to the folder, or let's clone it so we do not disturb the contents. And new folder, let's save it here. And this is a sample that has 2 dungeons, and if I select the first dungeon here and destroy, you see that it does so in a non-destructive way, where the original landscape is restored and I can build. So this allows me, so when I'm building and modifying the terrain below it, it's not like MS Paint where you would draw on top of it and the things below it gets destroyed or overwritten. This is more like Photoshop, where you have different layers and you create the dungeon layout blending in a separate layer and then you blend them together. So this allows you to destroy it and build it again. So destroy, build, I could randomize and it'll just retain the original. So if I head over to the landscape section, here you would see that there are actually layers. So I have this layer created by Dungeon Architect and it's managing it, and these are the layers that it uses to actually create the layout height variations and then smoothly blend it with the base layer that you use for painting. So this is the base layer. I'm going to select this and I could paint on this layer, but and then this is the Dungeon Architect layer that it created. And if I were to disable this, you see that this is working in a non-destructive way. And then it tells the engine to blend the dungeon's layout with the existing one. You have another one for the SGF builder as well, where we have these pre-built rooms stitched together, and all of the builders, they work with the landscape transformer. You can rotate them, place them anywhere, and it just works. And it's not confined to just rectangles. You can have any different shapes, even squares, even circles, or whatever you use to define the bounds of your rooms, and it works. So let's start from scratch. So file, new, basic, and get rid of this, and let's create a new landscape. And okay, just leave the defaults. Perfect. And we can modify this to see how the blending works. Let's add a bit of noise. So I'm going to go hit noise, maybe bring the brush size up to 20,000 maximum value. Okay. Now let's click this, Control Z. This is too much, so I'm going to reduce the tool strength to 0.1 maybe, and just one click, then another click, then another click. Just keep clicking till you get some detail. That's good enough, just so that we can see how the blending works. All right, now let's drop in a dungeon actor. Search for dungeon architect, dungeon, just drop it in, and you can select any builder. Let's choose grid, and I have a theme here, the fort theme that we saw, FORT, the wood fort landscape, and let's build this. So this is this is the theme, and by default it's not gonna modify the landscape because it's not set up to modify the landscape. So to set it up, it's very simple. Select the dungeon actor and go ahead and add a component. Click add and search for landscape. So you have dungeon landscape transformer component. So after you've added it, you need to specify which landscape you want this to modify. So you can have many different landscapes. For example, you could choose which one to modify. So you have to set the reference for it to work. Now let's hit build, and there you have it. Let's bring this up a bit. and it'll work with rotation as well. Let's rotate it, and let's bring this down. Let's get the count down to maybe 40. Build. Now there are a few things here that you could use to influence. So let me bring this even further down to highlight this. There are a few options in the landscape transformer. First off, you have the blending distance, how far apart you want the landscape heights blending to happen, over how much of a distance do you want it to blend with the existing landscape. So let me bring this down to 1000 for example to show you, and go back, select the dungeon route and hit build. So you see this is how it looks like, which might be fine if you're like really on the surface and you don't want that much, like you want to create like a cliff based look, but it's really depends on your art. But keep default, these seem to work nice. So this is the distance, how far apart from the surface do you want to go out. So internally I use a sign distance field, I create the layout and I generate a SDF around that and then smoothly blend it out. So all of that is done behind the scenes, just this is a value that you want to play with and to blend. Now a few more things, so let me bring this up, build, and if I go down to this, there is noise as well, so we add a bit of noise. So let me disable this and show you how it looks like without it, and build. So what it's going to do is to smoothly blend the layout height with the existing geometry that you have here. So we have some existing noise, so you see it's nicely blends in, which might be great if you're going for this kind of an art style, but if you want something more realistic, it will be nice to have a bit of noise to give that rocky texture, so you can add that as well. So this is enabled by default, you can play with these values. So I'm going to go back and build, enable with noise, and you see you get this nice little detail around this. I can change the frequency. So again, the noise scale is how far apart do you want these bumpiness to be, like do you want it to be very close and be chaotic, or do you want to be more spread apart. So usually what works well, an amplitude is how big do you want this to be. So I'm going to make this 2, and you see that the height of these bumps would be bigger. Now let's go ahead and do this build. So you see that the height is much bigger, it's more bumpy and coming up a bit. Again, depending on your art style, see what works for you. And usually with noise, what you want to do is these two values go in opposite directions. So if you are increasing the size of your bumps, think of them as larger rocks, you want to place them further apart. So you want to reduce this value so that they're further apart. So I'm going to make this 0.5 for example, because I double this, I'm going to bring it down 0.5. I'm going to bring this down by 5, by 0.5, destroy build. Yeah, so it really depends, but if you want to have a consistent look, just this is something that to keep in mind. And let's go back and build, and these are the octaves, like how much detail do you want it to be. So I'm going to increase this up. Usually the resolution that the landscape itself has, you wouldn't want this to be too much because it gives diminishing returns, but let me bump this up and see you get a bit more detail here. If that's something you want, but the defaults, they seem to work fine. Okay, let's build. Now let me show you another thing. Now there are some height variations here, right? It takes care of it. So if I delete this, you see it nicely builds through this wherever you have the height variations, and I'll take care of it. And what happens is as we go further away from the layout, we need to find out what we need to find out how much height we need to give, right? So what I do is I use a sign distance field and I figure out what is the nearest boundary and I use that height. and that allows me to give a nice little blend. However, when we have a noise variation like this, you want to smooth it out, which is what we're doing, and it creates this beautiful smooth edge around it. Even though we have a height variation here, we don't have that sharp height over here. It's blurred out, and that's what the blur parameter does here. So this is the blur. So if I were to disable this, let me just to show you, I'm going to bump this value really high and show you what this does. So this is what it does without it, right? This height variation is gonna bleed out all over here as well, and you see in other places as well. So it looks it doesn't look natural, right? Because this is man-made, all of this stuff. We don't want to bring it all the way out. So what blur does is it nicely blurs it out, and this is the distance of how far you want the full blur and the non-blurred version. So 200 distance apart, you will get the complete blurred version where we blur as in we smooth it out, right? So this is gonna get smoothed out like what you saw earlier. So let's build this again, and we get a nice smoothing, but we do not have smooth over here. We want the hard transition here. So that's what blur does. And we also have the capacity to paint the landscape. So you can paint the interiors with another material. For example, you might want sand over here, as in you override the material and you paint it like you would with the brush. It would paint it for you. It will also paint the outsides of it. And this is something we'll explore in the next video.